All right, it's 8 p.m. here on the East Coast, and we're going to go ahead and get started on time. My name is Azor Cole. I'm the state manager for American Promise, and thank you for taking time out of your busy night to be with us here today. This is really an important call. Why do we need to make the conservative case for getting money out of politics? That's what we're talking about on this call today. And there's two really huge common sense reasons that we just can't forget. The first is that this is a cross-partisan issue among Americans. Poll after poll shows upwards of 70+% of conservatives, liberals, and independents want big foundational change when it comes to the problem of money in politics, and specifically the solution of a constitutional amendment. And so sometimes when we see partisan gridlock in Congress, that's no reason to throw our hands up and say, well, we simply don't have the political will. Our job is to translate the political will that exists among voters into political power that's powerful enough to move legislators. That's really our job in a nutshell. And the second reason is just a logistical political reason. Constitutional amendments are really hard. They're supposed to be. And you need 3/4 of the state legislatures to approve something that passes through Congress with 2/3 supermajorities in the House and the Senate, 290 votes in the House, 67 votes in the Senate, or getting 2/3 of the state legislatures to pass binding convention calls around a single issue. Either way, you can't do it with one party alone. That's never been how we win constitutional amendments. It's simply not how it can be done. And it's just essential if we're to succeed that we're able to break through this partisan divide and incur real historic lasting change so dramatically needs. So we've got a lot to cover tonight, and just a rough agenda. I'm going to quickly introduce our distinguished panel of 5 guest speakers. It's a big call tonight. I'm going to ask them each a question to get the conversation started. And as they're talking, please be thinking of questions to ask them, because most of the call is going to be to hear your Q&A, and you can use the Q&A feature. It's in the bottom center of your screen. Just type in your question and we'll be sure to try to get to it. And then we'll end the call by talking specifically about the American Promise Candidate Pledge Program, a really powerful way that you can insert this constitutional amendment into the conversations being had specifically around the amendment in your upcoming elections. And we're really proud to have 2 candidate pledge signers on the call tonight, who you'll hear from in just a second. And I'm just going to go and give some quick introductions for our guest speakers. And if you could just say hi and wave to the camera when I introduce you so they know who I'm talking about, and then we'll hear from you in just a second here. So it's my honor to start with Jim Rubens. He's a former Republican state senator from New Hampshire, a former candidate for U.S. Senate in New Hampshire, a lifelong entrepreneur, and we're proud to say an American Promise board member. So Jim, thank you for being here tonight. We've also got Republican Tennessee State Senator Richard Briggs of the 7th District in Tennessee. Senator Briggs is a doctor, a former Army colonel, and he's served in the Tennessee State Senate since 2014. And we're just very proud to say that he's a recent American Promise pledge signer. So thank you for being here, Senator Briggs. We're joined as well by Patti Bounds. She is a Republican candidate in Tennessee, running for state representative in the 16th District. Patti currently sits on the Knox County Board of Education, and she's also an American Promise pledge signer, and was just telling us how she's out there knocking doors from a socially distance area, just about every night. So thank you, Patti, for taking time out of your busy campaign to be with us here tonight as well. We've got John Pudner. John's a former Republican campaign strategist. He's famous for outthinking rather than outsmarting, outthinking rather than outspending his opponents. And he's currently the executive director of Take Back Our Republic, the leading explicitly conservative organization working to bring integrity and transparency back to our elections. So thank you for being here, John. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by American Promise's own Susan Muller, who wears all of the different hats, but she's here representing us as American Promise's Business Network Manager. So we've got a wide range of expertise on the call tonight, and really excited to kickstart this conversation. And the first question I'd like to ask, Jim, it's a question for you. And, just broadly, can you lay out sort of the main points, in plain speak, why is supporting a constitutional amendment to allow Congress in the states to limit the influence of money in elections something that conservatives should support?
Number one, I find the one that is most persuasive as I go around different states is that the system we've got right now, very concentrated big money. Anytime you come across an election, even state legislative elections in swing districts, you're seeing money from California, New York, and Washington flooding into those elections, and it's destroying the 10th Amendment to the US Constitution. Voters in those particular districts are gradually losing control. They're losing control over elections to these big money out-of-state sources. A very small number of people are targeting these elections, and they're federalizing election after election. Just a little data point: before 2010, Citizens United, 15 races for Congress on average had more out-of-state money than in-state money. Post Citizens United, 125 congressional races, more out-of-state money than in-state money. So that's item number one. Item number two, Republicans used to be winners at this game of outside money, dark money, outside money, big money. And as of 2018, we're behind the curve now. Dark money, 2018, people on the left, organizations on the left, outspent people on the right 2-1. 2020, it's close to 2-1 for dark money, all outside money. We're behind about 60-38 right now. That's the latest data from Open Secrets. We're losing the game now, Republicans. The left and Democrats are winning on this game. Issue number three, we've got crony capitalism is destroying faith and confidence in free market capitalism in the United States. Companies have found that they can go to Washington and they can profit much more so than slugging it out in the marketplace for better products and services. They can earn 500 to 1,000 to 1 for investments and lobbying and campaign contributions. And so you're seeing real capitalism, free market capitalism that drives innovation and better products and services. You're seeing companies going to Washington, getting regulatory favors, buying tax breaks, and it's increasing monopolization. It's driving down innovation. It's driving down new business formation. It's aggravating wealth disparities, which is causing social turbulence, which is causing young people now, and I'll stop here, young people now prefer socialism over free market capitalism. So those of us who believe in free markets, typically conservatives, we've got to do something about this. And the big money, crony capitalists, are the problem we've got to solve.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jim. And I see someone in the chat already is asking for a recording of this Zoom webinar after, which we'll absolutely send out. But also, and maybe this is what you're asking about, maybe this wasn't, but we'll also send out that really clear, concise memo that you've put together, writing out sort of these top level points, Jim. We'll send that to folks in the email that we'll recap this call with tomorrow. So thanks for laying out just the top level points to kickstart this conversation. And the next question is for you, Senator Briggs. You've been in the state Senate in Tennessee for a number of years. Can you talk about, sort of the impacts of money in politics that maybe you've seen firsthand during your time in the Tennessee State Senate?
Yeah, and thank you very much for letting me to participate in this tonight. Just for everyone, I'm going to go back and give a little history of, the question is, how do we get to where we are right now? And you can really go back to 2002 when the McCain-Feingold bill, or Feinstein bill, was passed. And that was really the first major attempt to take some of the soft money out of elections and put some restrictions on it. We had the SWIFT votes that came up in the 2004 election, and that was where you had a group of people that were really trying to influence the election. They called it advocacy advertising, but it was pretty much just to try to discredit John Kerry about his Vietnam War record. And then, as was just mentioned, the Citizens United just turned all of that upside down when the Supreme Court, and it was actually 10 years ago this year that passed. And I think those of us in state government may say, well, what does that have to do with us? Because Citizens United, I mean, it was a federal issue. A lot of these are federal problems with monies going to the U.S. senators and the U.S. congressmen. But what I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years gets back to what we hear on the newspapers and read here on television and see in the newspapers. And it's about gridlock in Congress. And it's really because of the gridlock in Congress, it's trickled down now to the state level. I looked this up, and in 2018, there were 105 bills that were passed by Congress. There were 81 in 2011 and 72 in 2013. And the bottom line is usually we'll pass between 400 and 500 bills in Tennessee during a session. So this is gridlock in reality. Not very many bills are being passed. And what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years is all of a sudden we have all of this outside money coming in on state issues. And I think that what some of these, whether it's school vouchers, whether it's has something to do with drug regulation, they're coming and trying to pick off the states one by one, these groups. And we're seeing all of this outside dark money come into our elections. It's out of state money. It's not Tennessee money. It's not even money coming from Tennessee corporations, but it's people because they can't, and it's organizations because they can't get their agendas passed in Washington. They're now coming down the states. Marijuana is a perfect example. Marijuana legalization. We've had a tremendous amount of money coming in on it. I talked to one of the candidates this afternoon that's running for an open U.S. congressional seat in the Tennessee 1st District. And what we're seeing up there, there's one candidate who every bit of his television advertising is being paid for by an out-of-state, I call it third-party advocacy advertising. And that's why even at the state level, this is very important that we do something about it, because we're having non-local influences involved now in our elections and involved in the type of legislation we pass.
Yeah, I think Senator, more and more people across the country are just getting frustrated for that exact reason. We do some work in Maine, and a leader of a conservation group was telling me that they had out-of-state money opposing a ballot initiative trying to dictate some element of their hunting policy surrounding bears, and their mailers had photos of grizzly bears as their example, and there are no grizzly bears in Maine. These out-of-state interests really don't have their ear to the ground, and encouraged to hear when our elected officials not only see that as a problem, but speak out about it too. So thanks for being on the call and for signing the American Promise Candidate Pledge, saying, this is something that needs to be addressed. And happy to bring Patti Bounds into the conversation as well, another pledge signer and, candidate running for state representative in Tennessee. Patti, thanks for being here. And could you talk about just, why did you sign the pledge? Who approached you about it? And how are you seeing the impacts of money in politics in this campaign that you're running?
Well, thank you for having me. I believe strongly in our Constitution and the wisdom of our forefathers. And, Lincoln said in his Gettysburg Address, government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. But I really feel like our government is endangered by these large sums of money that are coming in. And I've personally seen some of that in my state house race. Senator Briggs mentioned vouchers, and that has been a very hot topic in Tennessee, and was not a topic that I was really going to make an issue. But other groups and organizations have spent a lot of money in this race to send in some mailers that are with misleading information, very dark, and to really scare and create fear in the voters. So I signed the American Promise Pledge because I think it's the best thing for our country right now. And I do believe that our government is endangered by the money that is being spent.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for running, and thank you for being here, Patty. And a little bit later on in the call, I should mention that we'll hear from Chet Hunt in Tennessee, the leader of the American Promise chapter there. And, you know, Chet reached out both to Patty here and Senator Briggs about the pledge, and we'll talk about how you can do that with your representatives. But, you know, thank you for running, and I'm sorry that, you know, it's such a top of mind concern for people running for office too. But that's the problem that we're working to clean up here, and excited to bring someone into the conversation who knows a whole lot about running campaigns effectively, John Pudner. John, can you talk about some of the challenges advocates might face when trying to win support from their conservative elected officials or candidates for public office? You know, really, what are the challenges that we have when we're trying to really build our cross-partisan political power?
Yeah, I do see a lot of unforced errors. So there are some things that can just be cleaned up. There's some tougher issues too, but I would say to avoid unforced errors, just do the Google test. Any legislator you're going to walk in to talk to is going to Google any term you use. So for example, it wasn't quite a money in politics issue, but related, you know, we wanted to talk about ranked choice voting, instant runoff in Georgia. Well, if you're going to walk into Georgia leadership, which is a very bitter, I mean, that's a very partisan state right now by current standards, and you talk ranked choice voting and the Google pops up, and that's like San Francisco and Seattle and, oh yeah, in Maine, that flipped a seat, didn't it? I mean, you're pretty much dead on your paragraph in. And so just talk about instant runoff, which is a variation on it, did not have any of the negatives. We were in with top leadership all the way up and having, you know, a good conversation about it, which I think may reach fruition. But that was an easy unforced error that could have happened. So I would say always Google your terms and think it. And I would go incognito on your Google, because obviously your search is going to reflect things you've looked for in the past. You really want to get just what the average person would, really what a conservative legislative leader would. So avoid those. The second thing is just guilt by association. You've got to watch, always an issue now, but just to stick with that Georgia example, one group had come in and tried ranked choice voting a few years earlier and also tried to throw out the Electoral College at the same time. Well, that's a showstopper among most Republican leadership now. And, you know, we had to actually point out that we were not for throwing out the Electoral College almost as part of our first sentence, even though it had nothing to do with the issue we were talking about. I mean, I actually made a point of getting published on being for the Electoral College before we walked in, you know, to have something to refer to. So those are just kind of the easy, unforced errors that can kill you, that you just, there's no reason to get sidetracked in them. But I think the tougher ones we have to work through now, on money in politics, it was always, okay, are you arguing for more transparency, or are you arguing for limits to avoid being overwhelmed by money? You know, there's a good argument for both. However, that's gotten tougher. You know, we were able early on to talk a lot about, well, how about a trade-off of higher limits for greater transparency. We never said unlimited. We said, yeah, I'd take higher limits if you could know everyone who was giving and hold them accountable. Unfortunately, with conservatives now, that's become so tied into doxing and coming out of businesses, and you know, the transparency has almost become a bigger issue for some of them, because they feel like you're trying to get these lists so you can go attack people. And it's not all unfounded either. I mean, I think there are cases in Wisconsin and Seattle, Mozilla in California. I mean, you know, they're more and more apparent. So this may create a dilemma for you, because it used to be, well, pick at least one of the two to fight for. You know, you can fight for transparency, you can fight for limits. I think they're both tough now, but the beauty of the 28th Amendment, what I encourage everyone to get back to, is something that Senator Rubens alerted to earlier. It's a states' rights issue. You know, when you go 28th, you're not saying we're passing a 28th amendment so that every state and every federal race has a $500 cap on contributions, or even that every state, everything is transparency, C4, C3s. All the 28th is doing is saying states have the right to do this. You can't take Citizens United and now apply it to every state and throw out state laws. And you see how that gets right to Jim Rubens' argument earlier. This is a states' rights issue. Why are you using judicial activism to go after states and their limits and go after Louisiana's cap? And so don't take the argument too far. When you're arguing for the 28th, you're arguing for the states to have the ability to do the things that fit their state. Don't roll in with 6 things you'd then like to see happen immediately thereafter. And that's the beauty of the 28th. I think keep it states' rights as much as you can, certainly within conservative leaders. And I think you'll get a lot further. And we are going to have both sides on this. I mean, I've certainly got friends of the other persuasion who are hoping everything's blue in a few months. And even if that happened, the side in power tends to start resisting any limits. We just saw it in Virginia where Democrats fought for 10 years for gerrymandering reform. And then as soon as they got in power, flipped, and the state convention, 1,400 to 200 votes, voted to stop it now. And Republicans have done the same thing in North Carolina. I'm not picking on the Democrats, but you're gonna, don't just sort of think, hey, well, if there is a blue wave in November, we're suddenly gonna be able to pass campaign finance laws. I think there's gonna be a lot of pushback. So we do need both sides, even if things don't go as badly as some of my friends want them to, from my perspective, in a few months.
Yeah, I love the concept, John, of, stopping the unforced errors as much as possible as, number one.
Very good advice.
To do. And, to the point that, a constitutional amendment, I mean, it's 2 or 3 sentences of, broad text that's meant to really open up the possibilities that, states and local governments currently are hamstrung in their ability to control money being spent in their elections. I'll just share the quick anecdote of a former Montana State Supreme Court Justice, James Nelson. Montana historically has had some of the strongest local campaign finance laws, but the Supreme Court, in perhaps no state more than Montana, has stripped them of being able to constitutionally enforce those laws. And this Supreme Court justice, rather than, working to, go around the edges and, fight for new laws under the current constitutional parameters, said, we've got to have this constitutional amendment. And he joined the American Promise Advisory Council for just that reason, John. There's severe limits right now on how states can manage and regulate the money being spent in their elections. We need them to be able to have limits on the money being spent in their elections, and that's why we're working on this.
It bears stating, Azor, that what this amendment at its core wants to do, it wants to grant to Congress and the states, as John said, the power to may set reasonable limits on campaign spending and contributions. It doesn't say what the limits are. It doesn't say that Congress has to do anything or the states have to do anything. It just grants that power back to the states and Congress. So it's very simple, straightforward. It doesn't say exactly what has to be done. That's a fight for the future. Just untying the hands of the states and Congress.
Exactly. And, one of the beautiful things about something that simple, you can bring in all sorts of different voices. And we're seeing more groups of people emerge making compelling cases for this amendment. One of the most compelling cases that I think surprises people sometimes is the economic, business-centered argument for why this is necessary. And Susan Muller, this question's for you, but as the business network manager for American Promise, can you talk about the launch of the National Business Network and how people can learn more and take action specifically using these arguments?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks, Azor. It's always a pleasure working with you. And I've been inspired by our fellow panelists, so I hope I can be inspirational too. So as Azor just mentioned, we just launched our National Business Network, which is an interest group within American Promise. It's for all types of business professionals, whether you're a CEO from a large company, an entrepreneur, mid-size, whether you're a retired business person. We're looking for all business voices that agree and want a level playing field so businesses compete based on the value they create in America's marketplace. This values-driven trend has been going on where businesses and business leaders increasingly care about the greater good. You can see this trend for equality with the number of corporate sustainability officers within corporations and the corporate responsibility statements that are coming out. A big example that happened about a year ago was the Business Roundtable. They published a statement on the purpose of a corporation, and this was signed by about 180 CEOs. And it's really like Jim Rubens so elegantly said, the Business Roundtable has stated that a free market system is the best means to generate good jobs, a strong and a sustainable economy, innovation, a healthy environment, and economic opportunity for all. So with these trends and background, we realized business leaders are uniquely positioned to contribute their voice to get rid of pay-to-play politics, spurred by unlimited spending of special interest using our business economic argument and perspective. So as Azor also mentioned, that it's sort of marvelous that some elected officials are surprised that business leaders are on our side to get rid of pay-to-play politics. So having the business voice really moves the needle when we're in meetings and we're writing to officials. So to attract leaders, business leaders, we created the National Business Network mission. And I'd like to read it to you. It's just, it's pretty short. It says, the National Business Network mission is to unite civically responsible, values-driven business professionals in cross-partisan advocacy to win an amendment to our US Constitution to create a representative democracy and free economy where businesses compete based on the value they create in America's marketplace. So I hope you're asking, how can I get involved? This is perfect time. We are planning our first quarterly, and I always like first quarterly. This is truly a first quarterly national business call that will be next week on Thursday, August 6th. Jeff Clements, our fearless founder and president of American Promise, is going to be talking about American Promise's strategies and the importance of our national business network. So, and you'll also even have a chance to help shape our national business network. So I hope you'll join us. I think that we have a link to sign up to that. So I'll put that into the chat so you can sign up for that call, or I think Melissa also has it. And we also just updated our national business website. So we'll put that link in there too, where you can find the business talking points to help clarify where you stand, and numerous ways to get involved and take action. So it has that website has an extensive business resource library. We'll give you a link, and there's also a link to sign up for the quarterly business newsletters and calls. So I'll do one last quick plug. And if you are already ready to take action, the first step you can take that would be marvelous is to sign our statement of principle for business professionals. And if you include a personal statement, you will automatically be a business network member. So thanks, Melissa. I see she's put them in the chat. And thanks to Azor for putting these links in the follow-up email. So back to you, Azor.
Fantastic. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I think it's powerful to be able to say, you know, companies, for the most part, with a couple small sort of monopolistic exceptions, don't like having to spend their money to try to curry favors with elected officials. You know, that feedback loop isn't beneficial for the majority of them either, just like the American people. And this is great. We've got a lot of time for Q&A, and we've got just a lot of really good ones. And I'm seeing a current theme in a couple of the ones at the top, and I'm just going to open this up to the panel. There seems to be just a desire to know how to best address the concern which, you know, we get with some frequency, the talking point that, oh, the 28th Amendment, that's going to infringe on our free speech. That's going to take away our First Amendment rights. What do you say to that to quickly dispel that notion and move on with the conversation? I'll open it up to our panelists.
Well, I did type response to a related question. I don't start by arguing about whether or not money is speech. I mean, you certainly can argue it, but I just don't think you need to defeat the argument. I think you start by reminding people that speech is limited. And so you can put some limits on speech, back to the old high school, college, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, although I always remind people you can if there is a fire in the crowded theater, just not if there's not. So, we put limits on speech. So even, and I make a point of saying I'm not ceding the point, I say for argument's sake, let's just say, even assuming money is speech, you can still put limits on money just as you can on speech. So I would just try a little, a little around that angle. Again, don't win arguments you don't have to win the point. I'll come at it more from that angle.
I get a couple of ways that I deal with that issue. Right, first start with some data. Post Citizens United, this is the last 10 years, we're looking at in the neighborhood of 6 individuals in America have been the source of contributions for 30% of outside spending. It is so intensely concentrated, the outside money, now that it's winding up in states like mine in New Hampshire. I was in the US Senate election, 2016, $132 million was spent, 95% out of state, controlled by a very tiny number of people, and it's drowning out First Amendment free speech rights of voters who live in those states. So there is a First Amendment issue, and the issue is ordinary Americans who vote for candidates in their own state, their own candidates, are drowned out. That's item one. And item two, if you read the Citizens United decision, I'll just read you a small snippet of it. They made a massive factual error here. This is right from the decision, 2010. Independent expenditures do not give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption. The appearance of influence or access will not cause the electorate to lose faith in democracy. This was text of the Citizens United decision. It's simply wrong. There was no factual basis for that finding. And if you look at polling, Gallup 2019, Republicans were asked level of satisfaction on 22 societal institutions. Ranking at the bottom with 22% support was the campaign finance system. This is Republicans. Ranking at the bottom of 22 public policy questions. Ipsos 2019, 86% of Republicans agree with this statement. Elected officials often do favors for big campaign donors. So Republicans and conservatives know that the system is rigged. They know the system suppresses the First Amendment rights of ordinary Americans. So I think you can push right back at that question if you get it, and you will get it. That is the number one argument of our opponents on the conservative side, that you're suppressing the right of Tom Steyer or Michael Bloomberg, who came into my state in 2018 in New Hampshire, and he flipped our House and Senate and Executive Council. It was an anti-gun activity. Okay, Republicans in my state are pro-gun. Okay, this is a conservative issue. I know it's totally, I know it's very, it's an electric issue, but we're a pro-gun party in New Hampshire. Bloomberg comes in, flips our House, Senate, and Executive Council in 1 year, 2018, by washing state legislative elections with money, and Democrats control all 3 institutions, where before Republicans did.
Mm-hmm.
Long answer, but yeah.
It's helpful for me, and I hope helpful for everyone on the call to hear some of these quick ways to get around that particular talking point. I see there's a great question from John here in the Q&A, who I know is very closely connected to this work, and his question is, in the political sphere, what sort of is the path forward for legislative action amendment? And Senator Briggs, maybe I'll direct this to you with your experience in the Tennessee state legislature, but maybe a 2-part question of how does this issue of a constitutional amendment, how do you think it currently is perceived in the Tennessee state legislature, for example, and then just logistically, what are some of the considerations that advocates should have in mind when pursuing legislative action at the state level around this?
Where I think there's a couple of factors that we'd have to consider, and what we're seeing right now in Tennessee, and you may or may not be aware, There is a movement for a couple of constitutional amendments being done by different organizations for an Article 5 convention, and that has to do with congressional term limits and also with balancing the federal budget. And one of the issues that we may have to deal with is competing, getting lost in the weeds, so to speak, because there's two other organizations that are out there working on it. I think at least in the Tennessee legislature, that's something. Now it's been received very well, both of those. And we have some of our leadership that's actually, it's been very involved on the national level with some of those issues that I just mentioned. But we got to be careful that our constitutional amendment, the American Promise, to put some sort of controls on on the campaign spending doesn't get lost in the weeds with these other issues or confuses the public with them. The second issue that we could potentially have in Tennessee is that we, of course, have a Republican governor, and as far as I can see, that's going to be for the future. But we also have supermajorities, very strong supermajorities in both the state Senate for Republicans and in the state House. For example, we have 28 Republican senators and we have 5 Democrats. So they're not going to have a big voice. And one of the things that we see in our Senate caucus, we raise a tremendous amount of money from ordinary PACs. Now, these are not the super PACs that are more involved in certain advocacy issues, or they're planning and producing their own political ads, supposedly independent from candidates. But because the disparity that you see between how much money the Senate Republican caucus collects and how much money the Democratic caucus receives every year, that is going to be an issue, I think, in Tennessee for us to change, because the Republicans right now are benefiting from it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And, I think even in working in a couple of different state legislatures in the past, one of the things that is always good to keep in mind is just being really honest with yourself and saying, well, what does the current leadership think of this? And you can get an okay idea by, scanning the news for their actions on related issues. But the quickest and best way is really to schedule a meeting and have an open-ended conversation with them. From your perspective, Senator Briggs, or anyone else on the call, Jim, I know you've served in public office too, and Patty, you're talking with voters every day. What goes into a really positive voter interaction that makes you walk out of that meeting, or someone knocking at your door feeling, man, I'm very curious as to what they had to say because of sort of how they approached the interaction? Are there particular tips or tricks that we'd be smart to really emphasize with people having these type of interactions?
I'd like to make a comment and really expound a little bit on what I just said, but also what is a factor. 2 years ago, there was a highly, highly competitive governor's race. And to put it mildly, it got extremely nasty, particularly with some of the out-of-state money coming in and doing some of the strongest negative ads that I think many people in Tennessee have ever seen. And we're going through that right today. I'm a very close friend, Ben, because he's a physician also. We now have a very competitive U.S. Senate race. And last week, it turned very, very negative. And I talked to one of the candidates today just about it. He said, I never thought we would be going there, but we just about have to, because all of this money is coming in from the outside. It's probably coming in for both. But I can tell you, Tennesseans are filled up, are had about up to there with negative ads. We know where the money's coming from. This isn't coming from Tennessee. And I think, if anything, the nastiness of these last 2 campaigns has really caught people's attention. Patty, and I'll call her Patty because she and I have been friends for about 10 or 12 years. I was on the county commission before I was in the state senate, and she was at one point chairman of the school board in the same county. So we know each other very well. But I think Patty may even want to comment on some of the nastiness And that could serve as an impetus to say, look, we need to stop the outside money. And then that'll stop some of this grossly negative campaigning.
Yes, thank you, Senator Briggs. You know, as he said, the governor's election was it was almost a brawl. It was very, very ugly. And then we're seeing that again. And we've seen some of that in our campaign this time at the, a smaller level. But I will say that people are tired of it. They don't like the negativity. And because of the race that preceded ours, it's particularly people just really don't like it. So I'm benefiting. My personal cell phone number was actually put on some of the mailers that went out from some of these groups. And so people are calling, but it's not calling for the reasons that they said to call me. They're calling to say, we will vote for you. We do not like what we're seeing. And this would not have happened without the outside money in this particular legislative race. So Senator Briggs is correct. We've seen a lot of this in the state of Tennessee, and it has really turned voters off.
Yeah.
Well, there's a single word when you're approaching someone to find out what's important to them, whether it's a candidate or a voter. You start by opening up conversation and listening. And if you start by listening, you're going to have hooks, anchors, issues that you might not have thought of. Yeah, there's always some bond between a candidate and a voter, almost always.
That's very true, Jim. I mean, when I go to the door, you were asking about door knocking. If I just listen, I can make a connection, whether it's their child, their dog, a common thing that, being a teacher in one of the schools. So it's very important to listen, and it just helps to open up the dialogue with people and to have a conversation that's meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that gets to one of the questions here. I'll paraphrase John's question in the chat here. He says, with so much distrust in information that people are consuming online, it's harder to have, just honest to God conversation with your neighbors and community members. And, how can we overcome those sort of challenges that make people feel, maybe more isolated than they really are, when what we need for a big project like a constitutional amendment really is people having that shared sense of purpose and working together around it. There's no easy answer to it. That's for sure. John, maybe I'll ask you. I know you have tons of experience running grassroots campaigns for elected officials. Can you talk, just about the importance of, not overlooking the power of just grassroots interactions, meeting with your community to incur change?
Yeah, because at first you just almost sound utopian today to say, well, we really need people to talk and listen. We all know it, but it's everything's so wired. Back to when I said at the beginning, Google things, but go incognito, because otherwise you're just going to feed your current beliefs. And it's so divided. It kind of ties in one of the questions that was in the chat. Just, hey, can't we get people to vote? Vote for some of these interests over party in a general election? And it's just tough right now. And my response there and here is, you got to try to win primaries. Both parties, go into either party's primaries and win, because at least then everyone isn't so wired to, I'm counting to how many legislators, how many members of Congress, who's going to win, who's going to be in power. It's all or nothing. I can't have a reasonable conversation, because even if I've got a member who's a problem, if that costs us Congress by one vote, everything collapses. That's where people are. And I just encourage people to get out there early. I mean, people power can win primaries, and that's when you can really talk. And, people get surprised just how nasty intra-party fights are. On the one hand, I always tell people they're much nastier than general fights. I mean, people know each other and they're bearing grudges, but at the same time, you don't go in with that. You're either my enemy or my friend. And I'm being fed by a news feed. I'm being fed by outlets. I cannot talk to you. And I just say get in early. I know some states have already had their primaries. Some haven't. Some do them late as beginning of September. But for those that are out there, that's when I think you still can put together coalitions and talk. And wow, why are we for this unlimited money? Why are we letting corporations kill a Republican candidate in the primary? That's not partisan there. You're just talking about what kind of leaders you want. I could use obviously examples of the other side, but I'm more versed in Republican politics. So it's got to start there and start earlier. And I realize I'm saying this fairly late in the year, but the earlier we can get before it's just down to who controls the world and does that destroy every value I hold dear? That's a hard conversation to get through, and that's someone's backdrop.
Another tip that works really well is to work through trust relationships. Whether it's a candidate or a voter, and let's say you're trying to move a candidate to support the 28th Amendment, or to move a voter, if you're a candidate trying to move a voter, find trusted relationships and use those relationships to engage in conversations about issues. And that's often smarter than trying to find exactly the right buzzword or the loudest shout. It's a way around the extreme mistrust of information sources that John just spoke about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's refreshing to, be asked an open-ended question, not trying to have one of those gotcha moments that are all too common in our politics. And I just want to ask, I think we've got time for maybe one more question. I think this one will have a fair amount of interaction among our panelists before we transition to talking specifically about the candidate pledge. But, in this work, it sometimes can maybe feel daunting when you see just the waves of money crashing into local races and, too many voters who might feel checked out or apathetic or like there's nothing that we can do. And I think it's so crucial to, ask ourselves the question, well, what reasons do we have to be hopeful? Because there are a whole lot of them, but would open that question up to you, our panelists. What gives you hope that we will be successful in this big historic project of a constitutional amendment to the United States Constitution?
I'll comment on that first. And I think it's what we're seeing at just about all levels of government is right now people are really frustrated. They don't trust the establishment, whatever that is. We elected a president that had never held public office before. In the state of Tennessee, we elected a governor that had never held public office before. And in our county, where Patty and I live, we elected a mayor. And our county is, it'll be interesting to see what we are in the 2020 census. I think we're getting pretty close to 500,000 people. 480, 490, 500,000 people. And we elected a mayor that had never held public office before. And I think that one of the ways that this could be sold is that we can't trust. We got to use the term, we've got to drain the swamp. And the swamp is all the money that's coming in from out of state, that's coming into these elections where there's really not a local interest, and sometimes even a national interest. And that's where the swamp is. And I think that could be part of the word that we can use. This is part of our effort to clean up what a lot of people don't like in government right now.
In the optimism front, I think the American people understand that we've got a backlog of really tough issues to deal with: war and peace issues, debt, mistrust, income equality, healthcare. Right? You can go on and on about them. And people understand, I think, in America, from left to right, that we've got to deal with these issues because our country has to deal with this stuff right now. And the optimism is that because there's so much understanding that we've got to break through and deal with these big issues, this 28th Amendment, this freeing up the system so that a small number of interests can't aggravate elections and flood the system with dark money and negative campaigns. I think people understand that's a predicate or a foundation stone, a gateway to allow us to fix this backlog of very serious problems. We got to fix the money system, and Republicans, 2 out of 3 Republicans understand this is a priority. It's got to be done. and something like 8 out of 10 Democrats. So there's huge supermajorities of both parties that understand this issue we're talking about, this 28th Amendment, restoring to states and to the Congress the power to set reasonable limits on outside money. People understand this is a gateway to solve these big problems we've got to deal with to save our country. That's optimistic because people are ready for this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I totally agree, Jim. I feel there is a movement for the better good out there right now. You know, over 80% of people are with us. They want to get big money out of politics. And a lot of people see this as a way to get back to equality, to decrease the partisan divide, to decrease the economic inequalities out there. So I really have hope. Even talking with the younger generation, I feel that they're less of a me generation and they're more of a we generation, and they want this equality. So I think that we're at a very good time for this issue to be being discussed. And when amendments are passed, it's generally in a time of turbulence, and we are definitely in a time of turbulence.
Yes,
So
we are.
I think we're
Less of,
well
less
placed.
of me, more of a we moment. I love that. And one of the things that gives me the most hope is seeing people out in their communities really taking the reins and making positive change for this amendment. I'm going to bring in those people to the conversation here. I'm going to Chet Hunt into the conversation, making him a panelist here. Chet lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. He is a Vietnam War veteran. He's a retired city planner. I had the honor of spending some time with him 2 years ago in Knoxville, where we launched the first chapter in Tennessee, and using the candidate pledge in this recent election. Chet reached out to Senator Briggs, Patti Bounds, and a whole number of other candidates running in Tennessee, and has just had tremendous success. And Chet, thank you for being here tonight, and for everything you did to make this call possible. And really curious, sort of any tips and tricks, to use John's term, unforced errors that you avoided, to have these successes that other people might be able to replicate where they are in the country.
Well, I don't know if I have, a silver bullet kind of explanation for any of it. I just start with the premise that everybody that I'm encountering are good, decent people. And I love my country, and my heart is being broken by what I see. And as I age and watch my children and grandchildren grow up, it just breaks my heart to think that I'm bequeathing such a dysfunctional system that we have today. And in my retirement, I said I'm going to dedicate my time to try to do something about this. From volunteering and any other means that I can, because it's such an important issue. I think it's the root of many of our problems. But in any case, with COVID-19, I've been working on this for a couple of years. Our chapter started 2 years ago in October, but we've been very active. And during this quarantine situation, I thought, well, what can we do, that could be effective, that's limiting because of the quarantine situation. And we thought, well, we'll embrace the pledge. It's such an important thing to have people speak out on this issue, and we make it public. We have a Facebook page that we post all this on, and of course the national database, national website. And I do letters to the editor, and I do op-eds, and I try to give those people recognition that take the pledge. I admire each one of them that do that. I mean, when you talk about what gives you hope, that gives me hope. And it's Republicans and Democrats and independents alike that are, like Senator Briggs said, they're fed up to hear, And like I told Patty in our conversation when we met, I said, I don't care how people vote. They have a right to vote as they choose to vote. I just want their vote to count. I don't want them to be drowned out by, the big money interests that are controlling things right now. The relentless corporatization of our democracy is just so disheartening. I mean, you watch it march on and on and on. And what concerns me even more, that motivates me to do this work as a volunteer, because sometimes it's hard work. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of meetings, a lot of personal expenses. As I say, you give time, talent, and treasure for the cause. But these corporations that we talk about that are channeling money into states for special interests and their own interests, many of those corporations have American names, and we think they're American corporations, and they're not. So a lot of this money is not just coming from out of state, it's coming from out of the country. And there's a quote here I'd like to read. It was from the nonpartisan group called the Campaign Legal Center. Some of you may have heard of it. And they said in one of their statements that the dark money provision ensures that the door to secret foreign dollars in US elections remains wide open through secret contributions to these ostensibly non-political groups that run campaign ads that they're salt ads without any disclosure of who those donors are. And as the gentleman, as John said, about states' rights, I mean, that's what the whole award-winning documentary Dark Money was all about. It was, the federal government or the Supreme Court, in their activist decisions, took the rights away from Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Montana's a red state. They've had laws on the books there since 1912. And they were having their elections, and all of a sudden this anonymous dark money started pouring in to influence the election. They're essentially trying to engineer the elections in Montana. And when Montana said, "Hey, we're putting a stop to this. We can't even find out the origins of this money. We're finding, post office boxes and all these weird things," and they said, "We're putting a stop to it." And it went all the way to the Supreme Court in Montana, but then they got overruled because of the Citizens United ruling. So the states' rights were taken from them. Something that's been on the books since 1912. So this work is very important to me. It's perverting our democracy. And like Patty was saying earlier, we're in real danger. And that motivates me to do this work. And like you said at the onset of this, Azor, it takes everybody. But this is an issue I think everybody can get behind. It may be a unifying issue that helps our country because it's a historical effort. And with everybody working together on this issue, because we have the common interests, it affects all of us, it may help heal a lot of wounds as we go forward in this work.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that drives me as well.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful sentiment to really lay bare there, Chet, that this has incredible, potential to heal a lot of wounds, as you said, and, approaching each conversation with the premise that you're talking to a decent human being. I cannot discount the importance of that. So thank you for sharing,
Everyone when I leave the interaction with them, I'm renewed with hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel good about meeting them and about being an American, and that they have this desire, whatever our ideologies are, they have this desire to live up to the creed of what America is supposed to be. What our founding fathers intended. Those rights are for humans, for natural persons, not creatures of government and little legal entities to manipulate things. So
yeah.
Let's be consistent.
Yeah, sometimes people just need to be reminded, and would encourage everyone on the call to approach their candidates, asking them to join these candidates on the call and the hundreds across the country who are stepping up from conversations just like the ones Chet has started. We've got the pledge program really clearly laid out how you can use the tools and have these conversations successfully in your community. And we're going to go ahead and end the call right on time here. So we've got just a couple seconds left, and I just want to give a big thank you to everyone for listening in, and to our wide, diverse, and really experienced professional panel. So thank you all for being here as well, you guys.
You all give me hope.
This is great. Nice concluding.
You give
Yeah.
us,
Great.
you give us hope.
Thanks, Azor.
All right. Have a good night, you guys.
Okay, good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye all.